This is one of the little polypores. Polypore mushrooms are mostly wood rotting mushrooms or leaf rotting mushrooms. And if you look at the under surface, actually this is one that is called a toothed polypore. So it's like somewhere between the tooth mushroom that we looked at earlier and a polypore. But if you look at the underside, it has those bristles that look like the bristles on a brush. So this is one of the toothed polypores. Definitely a wood rotter, a saprophytic mushroom. And you know, I might be able to sit down with this and put a species name on it, but some of these kind of nondescript small fungi that you find, I mean, it's very difficult to be able to identify them in the field with any confidence. So rather than give you wrong information, I'll say I'll look at it.
More for your collection.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, look at this one.
Here, I've got another basket. You can toss them in here as well.
I don't know what they are.
Let me see.
Yeah, that's pretty.
So we were just talking about the gypsy mushroom and it being in the Cortinarius family. So this is a Cortinarius, and the Cortinarius is called that because it forms this little membrane. As the mushroom cap forms and it starts to produce its spores, this membrane covers the gills and protects it until it's ready for the spores to come out. And then when it does, it breaks free, and in some cases it'll leave like a little skirt-like membrane or some kind of remnants on the stem. In the case of Cortinarius, if you look at it close, it almost looks like a spider web material. And so it stretches and then breaks free. And then as it starts to produce spores, this stuff is so sticky that the spores stick to it. And so it really makes Cortinarius pretty easy to identify in the field, because you can just turn them over and look and you see these brown spores, and that tells you that this is in the Cortinarius family. The species of Cortinarius are really difficult. There's lots of different kinds and they vary you know, a lot. And so there's a handful that you can identify in the field with some confidence, but a lot that you can't.
It helped me to know that cortina means curtain.
Exactly. That's a good point, Doug. And so lots of times with the Latin names like that, if there's something that it's actually describing about the mushroom, it really helps you to be able to remember the name and you make that association. So,
and is there any mushrooms that are easy to confused with Alba violaceus?
Well, you know, that's kind of a loaded question, because if you look at poisonous lookalikes, a lot of the field guides will address that. Is there anything that looks vaguely like this? So sometimes, you know, the poisonous lookalikes really don't look that much like it. So it depends on
How much are you paying attention?
Exactly, but that's a good place to go always to like do the comparisons, especially if they're poisonous lookalikes, because then you avoid the poisonous species. So.
And what can a poisonous wound do to you?
Kill you?
Yeah?
Well, there's, you know, here's the thing. There's only a handful, very small number of mushrooms that grow here that will kill you. But there's a lot that have different kinds of toxins, and the toxins vary quite a bit. So it can be anything from a night of diarrhea, 48 hours of misery. It can be, you know, like a gastrointestinal upset, or, you know, in some cases it can be life-threatening. So it's something to take very seriously. But, you know, I showed you the one that's called the Angel of Death, or Destroying Angel, the white amanita. That one is the most common one that is deadly poisonous mushroom. So if you learn how to identify amanitas and you just remove those from the menu, then you've eliminated a huge number of the potential poisonous ones. So the way I like to approach it is learn those first. I mean, it's very important to learn those first, and then, you know, it makes it a lot easier, and you can then you can eat the edibles with more confidence that you're not going to wake up dead.
I got an interesting orchid over here we might want to look at.
Okay, got another plant.
So this here is one of our special woodland orchids. And what's interesting about this is during the winter, in the fall of the year, it has a bulb that'll produce one leaf. And then that one leaf will stay around all winter and it'll collect the sun's energy. And then in the summer, the leaf falls off and later on produces this one little stem of little orchids. This one's called the cranefly orchid. And the cranefly orchid is called that because craneflies like those giant mosquitoes. They live with the long legs. It sort of looks a little like insects hanging off there. That's actually the nectar gland, the nectary. And what's interesting about these is the way they grow. And like most orchids are one of the biggest families of plants. There's thousands of species. Most of them grow in the tropics. They grow up in the trees. Well, in temperate environments like this, where it gets cold, they can't afford to live in the trees. So they're terrestrial orchids. So lady slipper is one of our terrestrial orchids. This is another one of the terrestrial orchids. And a lot of the orchids in Europe also have the same basic way they work. And I sort of very carefully dug this up, and I'm going to rebury it when it's through here. But you can see the way it forms. It makes these little bulbs. And they almost always have two bulbs together. Sometimes there'll even be a third one or a fourth one on there. But see the two little bulbs on there? Well, there's one of our orchids that grows up in the higher mountains called Adam and Eve root. And supposedly, it's actually a love charm. And see, and what you do is he takes the Eve root and she takes the Adam root. And as long as they keep their roots, they'll maintain their bond, will remain strong and true. And in these days of tumultuous interpersonal relationships, soaring divorce rates, can we afford to snicker at a potential remedy for such a thing? You know. So then the question always came about, so there's two little bulbs on there. Which one's the Adam root and which one's the Eve root? Well, I always wondered about that. How are you supposed to tell which is which? And I was given a talk to some old timers over in the Piedmont, North Carolina. It was like a museum group, and I mentioned, I can't tell how you're supposed to tell. And one lady says, oh, well, we always knew how to tell. You did? How'd you do? She said, we'd drop them in water. He says, and Adam would float and Eve would sink. And sure enough, if you take one of those bulbs and you put them in the water, one will float and one will sink. And of course, the reason is, biologically what's happened is the one that had produced the flower last year is kind of dry and kind of empty and kind of finished. And so it's the one that floats, right? And the one that's ready to really sprout and produce the bulb, or produce the flower, that produce the female, that's the female, and she's engorged and she sinks, But the people in Europe, they noticed the orchids had the same kind of a format as the terrestrial orchids. They had these two little bulbs underneath. And so they named them. You know what they named them? They named them orchis. You know what orchis means? Testicles. Because it has two little balls. So there you go, there you go, and that's how they got their name. So isn't that just kind of an amazing thing there? And I'm going to tuck it back in the ground here where it came from. And let's see. Then there's also we're going to see a lots more of this, but this here is called Lycopodium, or sometimes they call it princess pine, sometimes they call it ground cedar or running cedar. And it's one of those allies that's sort of allied to the ferns. It's not a flowering plant, but it produces a spore case, these little spore cases that look like little clubs. And one of the other names for it is club moss. And the fall. Well, so one time I went to New York City, and I was out there. I went to Times Square, 42nd Street. And I was checking out all the wildlife up there. And boy, you should have seen it. It was amazing. Quite a scene going on there. And I went into a magic and novelty shop. You should have seen the novelties they had in there. And I went in there and speaking my best botanese. I said, do you have any lycopodium powder? And they said, oh, you mean dragon's breath? I said, yeah, that's the stuff. He said, yeah, I got lycopodium powder. Here, I'll sell you a bottle. Sold me a vial like this. And this is used. Well, what happens? You can go out in the fall of the year, and they'll produce these little clubs that are sticking through. And we'll get up the trail a little ways. I think we'll probably see some more. These little clubs that stick up in the air, and they're loaded with spores. Well, you can pick the spores. You can pick the little clubs and set them like in a container when they're getting ripe. They'll open up and they'll shed all this powder. And the powder's used in the magic industry. And what'll happen is they'll have a stage and there'll be a candle burning, and a magician will come out and he'll point his finger, El Magico! And he'll point his finger and like flames will just come right out of his finger. And what he's doing, is he's hiding one of these little vials. He had one of these vials in his hands, and when he squirts it on a flame, watch what happens. And you can do this right with the plant. You can actually find a plant in the fall of the year when these things are producing their spores, and you can actually shake it on a match. It'll go, or you can collect it. You can make your own flash powder. I collected this many years ago. I used the stuff that I bought. But isn't that sort of amazing that it's been used for that kind of a purpose? And supposedly in the old days they used to actually have lycopodium lamps. And when a politician would come to town having a political rally, and he would make some great point, the people who were attending the lamp, they would all blow this lycopodium, and it would all make a big flash. Hooray! So politics, people have been elected for office because of lycopodium. And then I talked to a geologist. He said when they're mapping caves and they're mapping rivers that go through caves, it's how do you find out if the water that went through this cave here is showing up down here? How do you know which water is which? And so, you put a dye in it, but how do you know if you're going to be there when the dye comes through? You put something that floats through, how do you know you're going to be there? So what they would do is they would put the lycopodium powder in the water during a time when there's no native lycopodiums producing. And then they put little strainers at different exits to the cave. And they would be able to collect it and then examine it for the lycopodium because it would stay suspended in the water. So it's kind of amazing how many different uses this plant has gone through.
And this lycoperdon?
Lycoperdon. So oh yeah, can we talk about that?
Yes, please do.
All right. You can let me talk about this little mushroom?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So lyco's wolf, right? Lycopodium, wolf foot. I mean, to me, I don't know why that's really that vine where to put it. Looks like a wolf's foot, but sometimes it's called crow's foot because it looks like a crow's foot. But then this one is called lycoperdon. This is a mushroom. This is one of the puffballs. Lycoperdon means wind of the wolf. Basically, wolf farts. See that? Like a wolf fart, right? Now, a lot of times kids will play with each other and squirt these things. It's not really a good thing to squirt in each other's face because supposedly that spores can get into your respiratory system and can kind of create a problem. Wolf farts disease, right? And one time I was talking to a group, and this one woman from Quebec, Canada, says, "Well, that's what we call them in French, petit loup." Petit loup. Oh, my little petit loup, how are you tonight? So anyhow, so these little puffballs, before they produce the spores, when they're all white inside, they're edible. So, okay, well let's see. That pretty well. Maybe while we're here, all standing around, here's. Does anyone recognize this plant here? No, mountain laurel. Mountain laurel. Well, you've been studying your plants, and you know it's mountain laurel. And I was talking about how the mountain people call that laurel. They call it, and what the mountain name for this is ivy. Have you noticed all the place names around here? Ivy Creek, Forks of Ivy, Ivy River. That's all named not for English ivy. It's named for this plant, which they call ivy. One time I ran into a. I was with that older woman in Kentucky, and we were out wandering around, and I'm asking her plants. And of course, a lot of times when talking to the older people, I don't try to tell them what I know. I try to just try to be the empty vessel. So of course I know this plant is mountain laurel, and I know its name is Calmia latifolia, but I asked, I said, what's this plant? She says, oh, that's poison ivy. I said, poison ivy? Why? I didn't say poison ivy. I said, why do you call it that? She says, because it's poison, buddy. Sheep or goats getting into that, it'll kill them deader than a hammer. And I thought about that, And I said, well, what do you call that three-leaf vine that gives you the itch? She says, oh, that's poison vine. So she had a name for it, And then I thought about it a little bit, like we all know, we all studied our books, we all know this is mountain laurel, right? And think about it, if you go into the eastern seaboard, all along the mid-Atlantic states and in the coastal plain, if you go into the woods is covered underneath the understory of the plants with this mountain laurel. Well, where's the nearest mountain? Not 300 miles away, And then now, is this in the laurel family? No, it'd be better call it sassafras laurel. This is in the heath family. So what's a better name for this, poison ivy or mountain laurel? So again, sometimes you get around these herb people and they start rattling off all these Latin names. You think, this sounds so pretentious, Well, it's not really trying to be pretentious. You got to make sure we're really talking about the same plant. And so eventually it comes down to got to make the Latin name for it, So, all right, I think that pretty well covers what's around here. We could mention that. Right, this here is witch hazel. Now, which hazel was that? What's distinctive about it is it's something very distinctive about it. It doesn't really have points too much on the leaves. Sort of has teeth, but not really teeth. Just has kind of this little ruffled, sort of lopsided looking leaf. And this is the leaf they use to make the witch hazel extract. And a lot of mountain kids for many years would make their money in the summertime. They just go out and they get what they call them beadwood, they called it. And they just go through and just strip the branches, strip the leaves off of it, and let them dry, and sell them to the witch hazel people up in Essex, Connecticut. And they had a great big still up there, and they put all these leaves in there, run a still through it, and add a bunch of alcohol, and make witch hazel extract, which is what you can buy in the store as sort of a gentle astringent. It also can be used as a tea, and also supposedly can be used as a poultice for varicosities, for blood veins. Let's wander on up the trail here. We'll find some more mushrooms and more who knows what.